We're standing here in front of St. Patrick's Church in Washington, D.C. The church has been fairly active. We've seen people coming in and leaving the church as we've been standing here. However, if you ask the average American across the country, they would say that religion in general is losing its impact on American society. This is a question we've actually asked going all the way back to 1957 in the Eisenhower administration, and this is one of the most negative views that we have seen on that measure. Right now, 77% of Americans say that religion as a whole is losing its influence on American society, where only 20% say that it is increasing its influence. This is pretty negative, and in fact, we've seen these kind of negative numbers over the last few years. But if we go back in history to 1970, we find that Americans' attitudes were about the same on this measure then, with 3/4 of Americans saying that religion's losing its influence, and only 14% actually say that it was gaining influence. That was when Richard Nixon was president. There was big conflict about the Vietnam War. There were cultural and sexual revolutions going on in the country, and for whatever reason, Americans were as likely back then as they are now to say that religion is losing its influence. Now, we didn't ask Americans whether or not they thought this was a good thing or a bad thing. You can imagine for a moment that a highly religious person could actually bemoan the fact that religion's losing its influence, and somebody who is a secularist, less religion, could actually say this is a good thing that religion is losing its influence. However, we did have another question in the survey which gives us a little insight into how Americans might be thinking about the fact that America is apparently viewed as becoming more secular. We said, if more Americans were religious, would this be positive or negative for American society? And 75% of Americans say that would be a positive. You see that number in front of you there. This is pretty suggestive of the fact that a lot of Americans probably don't think it's a good thing that religion is losing its influence in society, because 3/4 of them say, hey, if more Americans were religious, it would be a positive for society. So all in all, we have this view that religion's losing its influence on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have a lot of Americans who say, hey, if more Americans are religious, that would actually be positive for American society. In Washington, D.C., in front of St. Patrick's Catholic Church, I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.